Hey family. So since early this morning I felt the pull to speak about a topic that just woke up on me. And I don't want to sound cliched, but I want to talk about love. But I want to talk about love and its relationship to stillness. I find love is like knowledge. There are two types. There's an external love that we find in knowledge that comes from others. It comes from teachers, it comes from family, it comes from the wise. But then there's also an internal knowledge which surpasses that constantly, and that's your inner guidance, the inner understanding of things. Love, I think, is no different, and it has a relationship to stillness. And in our modern day world, many people are great at talking about love. Our religions are great at talking about love. Our spiritual leaders are great at talking about love. Spiritual YouTubers are great at talking about love. But living love is a very different story, and actioning love is much harder than speaking about it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm an expert and I've cracked this, but I do have an experience to share. Before I went to Tanzania, I lived alone in nearly complete solitude. It was a very monastic period of my life, and it's a period that's gone. I yearn to get back to it sometimes, but that is not the journey God has me on. That period was necessary to become the man that I am. Now, as a man with a family and many responsibilities, I can't go back to that as easily, but I find stolen moments of it. And they are, the romantic notion of living that way is wonderful, but I'm not willing to renounce the world when I know that I can help others inside the world. When I was living that way, I began to notice that love was coming out of me very naturally. But when I'm in the world, and especially the busy world of technology like we have today, it seems to be becoming more and more clouded and more difficult to find that. And the reason I see this happening is when I was out in the stillness of nature, that stillness in and of itself is kind of love to me. When I was sitting in among trees and they were moving in the wind, or the wind was moving in them, I do not know which it is. Or perhaps it was my mind moving them, because they were just doing what they do and my mind needed to interpret. But whatever it was, there was beyond that. I think beyond the mind seeing these things move is a good example. There was a stillness, and when you connected to it, love began to really pour out. And when I connected with the stillness of the nature around me, with the tree, etc., and tried not to explain it, again, it bubbled up, it rose inside me. And it got to a point where I was overflowing, and I had an ability to start sharing that with others. And in that time, I remember close to the end, I laid myself down before God, and I said, God, what is the meaning of this? And he responded to me very quickly. And he showed me, you have endured suffering in your life until you got to this point where you started to understand something. You started to reconnect the separation that brought the additional depths of the suffering that you had gone through. And because I had gone through that, he was able to show me that same suffering reflected in the face of others. And predominantly he showed me it in children. Children who had done nothing wrong in the world. Children who did not deserve to suffer, as none of us deserve to suffer. And when he did that, he kind of showed me how blessed and lucky I am to even be able to ask the question, what's the meaning of it? When there are children who can't feed themselves, children who have to work, children who will never have the luxury of asking that question. And thus I realized straight away, this is the meaning of life. The meaning of life is to get everybody up to that point where we can start asking those questions. The meaning of life for me is to ensure that that suffering is not present to the best of my ability. The problem I found, however, is the longer I stayed inside that work, whilst living inside a children's village with so many persons in need, I began to forget the stillness. And I began, because of that, to become hard-hearted. And overdoing it, as the old adage goes, you can't pour from an empty cup. You can become hard-hearted even in doing God's work. And the longer I progressed and I kept trying to push my needs away, the more hard-hearted I got. And the more persons might have came to me in 2015 whilst I was out and asked for help, and I'd have responded with immediate compassion and openness. By the time 2017, 2018 came, I was so exhausted I could see them coming, and I almost felt like going in a different direction to avoid them. And I would ask myself constantly, and I would ask God, God, help me to have the love I need inside me. But this was not a simple answer, because the request I was putting on him, I was blocking with my free will, because I wasn't bringing the love to me that I had experienced whilst out in that time of nurturing and nourishing myself in the stillness of nature. And thus in our modern day time, as Jesus said, the flesh profiteth nothing. And when we spend a lot of time away from stillness, we spend a lot of time inside technology, we take ourselves away from the connection to that inner stillness, which is the same stillness that a tree exists within, or perhaps the wind that is moving through the trees exists within. It might be a movement, but when the mind doesn't define it as movement, it's actually a stillness. And when we can connect to that stillness, that love comes out of us. And only in that stillness is the spirit found, because in that state of spirit there's no carnality. Because Christ could not be born in an inn. And the inn is a very carnal place. It's noisy, it's full of chatter. So they had to go to a quiet, more humble place, in a stable surrounded by animals. And thus it is with us that we can't give birth to those good qualities within us that represent the Christ in the chatter of the inn. And the more we spend time on technology, the more we are forced into the responsiveness of the chatter of the inn, because we are responding from not only our minds and our impulses, but hormonally as well. And thus we get hooked on the stimulus of the instant gratification that screen time gives us, the dopamine hit, the getting to the end of the interesting story and on to the next one. We lose track of the long, prolonged, beautiful and nourishing subtleness of living life from a state of stillness. And it doesn't mean sitting still in the lotus and not living your life. It means living life by being guided by the same stillness that allows for nature to give way. And inside that state, love is a natural occurrence. And it's as if our natural state of being, when we are born into the spirit, by getting still enough, by giving up on the flesh, because the flesh profiteth nothing, that we start to feel this love overflowing from within us. And this is the directive of Jesus was there. Take no thought for tomorrow, take no thought for this. All of these things, if you follow them, you must return to that place of stillness. You can't take thought and not come to a state of stillness. If you take no thought, it will occur. And thus, again, when we look at what technology is doing to us, it pulls us into the body and into the mind. And it creates a barrier between us and the connectivity of that stillness. And that's why I'm so big on getting out into nature, where technology can't interfere with you. But in these days, even when I go out into nature, I see people walking with their phone. And thus, even out in nature, the very call of our soul to go out into nature these days is a call for stillness. And that stillness is the place where love will come into action. And yet we take something with us. We take the expression of anything but stillness. We take our technology with us. And this is the relationship I find between stillness and love. I cannot live my life to help others unless I give myself that space to have that love cultivated within me. Love doesn't just come naturally to us. It does not. It takes a type of discipline And that word has such a bad connotation. People think of discipline and they think of authoritarianism. And discipline is an art. It's a beautiful, subtle, stunning art. And when you conquer these disciplines within yourself, because the flesh profiteth nothing, you come to a state where the fulfillment that you find from it is so great and so vast that the flesh can't compete. To a lesser and lesser degree, its impulses can't compete. Because you enter this state, and in that state, is it not that we're all looking for love and joy and happiness? And when you come into that stillness, when you come into it, it rises inside you. It just rises. Just as a tree rises from a seed, love rises from inside us. But you've got to find that relationship between your stillness and that love. Because too often in this world, love is spoken and love is verbalized. And too often the terms "I love you" are thrown around. But sit with your loved ones, sit with your children, with your wife, your husband, whomever. And you try to tell them, "I love you," without words. Try to do it. Look at them. Let that other type of love, that secondary type of love, let the first type, as I mentioned with knowledge, the inner love that comes up from within you from stillness, let that influence them as their external love. Let the external love they feel be something truly profound. Rumi said, "Silence is the language of God, and all else is poor interpretation." And that's exactly what I've just described as my experience in life, and I know that he's right. When you fall away from silence and you come back to carnality, train your carnality. Train it. Train it with love. There's nothing wrong with using that. There's nothing wrong with using the message of someone like Jesus Christ to train your carnal mind to understand the goal. Because the carnal mind is very temperamental. It can go where it wants to go. But if you keep programming it, it's more likely to come up to that state of, love, rather than that state of self-service or whatever it is that is negative that the carnal mind can do. But if you really want to bathe and experience love, you've got to come from a different space. You've got to come from the inner love. And that's found in stillness. And the external love you can learn, and the external love that you can feel from your loved ones, your family, your friends, from the messages of great spiritual persons on the planet, from the messages of those persons in your congregation perhaps, in your meditation classes, whatever community it is you're part of. Enjoy it and bask in it. But sometimes it's not quite enough to nourish the very core of you. And that's because the core of you is waiting for you to actually let it be a source of it. And the source of it, for me, in my experience, and I believe many others, will only come from getting into that connectivity to that place I call stillness, where even if you're sitting in a forest and a tree is moving in the wind, you make a decision that, is the wind moving the tree, or is the tree moving in the wind? And you fall away from it and say, no, my mind is moving it, and there's a stillness beyond there when my mind stops. And this is, I really feel, what Jesus directed us to. Take no thought. What a beautiful thing it is when you do. So, try living love today. Try actioning love instead of speaking about it. And remember, if you're not feeling very loving, I have an inkling, if you can get quiet somewhere, if you can get still, it'll start refilling itself. It'll start flowing from you, just as a tree flows from a seed. God bless, guys. Bye. And if you want to put your love into action today, instead of just into words, let me introduce you to a little boy called Joseph. Joseph is a member of the Maasai tribe, but he's in a part of the Maasai clans where mass animal agriculture has encroached on their lands, leaving the tribe in desperate poverty and having the necessity now, due to having no space to move around with their animals, etc., for the children to go to school. Not only that, but little Joseph says that his number one hobby is praying. And he says when he's older, he would love nothing more than to be a priest and to be able to help people to meet God in the way that he does when he prays. That's exactly the words he gave to our social worker when he was being interviewed to join our children's fund. If you want to support him, as little as the cost of a cup of coffee a week in the West is all it takes to get that child into full-time education access. Because if not, life is bleak, and child labour is the number one threat to a child like Joseph. Thanks guys for all you do, and I'll see you in the next video. God bless.
What is love really if it only affects one aspect of life? That's like a musician who only accepts his own musical time. That's like a preacher who only respects Sunday morning and not Saturday night. That's how this soldier can come